This video is about how to add a variety of forms of negative space. Negative space can come in the form of cutting all the way through something or carving partway through in the form of relief. If you carve all the way through something, if you put a light inside, you will shine a little light or a pattern of light out. If you carve partway through, your vessel will be able to hold some sort of liquid. The first form of negative space that we're going to go through is called piercing your vessel. Now, when you pierce your vessel, you're carving all the way through your vessel or whatever project you're working on. This happens after you're smoothing your vessel and you trim it and you've got kind of a lot of the finishes done. In order to prepare, sometimes it's helpful to have your shape all cut out and traced in paper form so that you can trace it cleanly onto your clay. Don't worry if you're not great at drawing. This is a step that you can print a shape off as long as it's fairly simple. You can cut it out and then trace it onto your clay. You can see here that my project is all smoothed out, it's condensed, and it's ready to go. The surface is very clean and I'm ready to trace my image. The inside of my pot is also addressed and it's nice and smooth. For the shapes I'm going to cut out, I have an image of a doll horse. Notice that it is fairly simple. It's very hard to cut out a lot of images with a ton of detail. In this case, I cut out the shape that I wanted, and then I also put masking tape over the top of it. The masking tape helps when I'm using it over and over again, so in this case I'm using it for a pattern. So I covered it in masking tape on both sides to protect it so that I could use it over and over again. As I'm starting to place my image, I need to pay attention to where I'm doing the cutouts. I don't want them too close to the bottom or too close to the top of my vessel. If I have them too close to the top, it's going to make the top really weak, and if I have them too close to the bottom, I might actually cut into my base. So a good rule of thumb is to leave a nice rim around the top of whatever you're cutting into to make sure that that rim doesn't break down. Once I'm satisfied with the placement, I'm going to take my needle tool to just trace all the way around my image. Because in the case of this project, I want to make a luminary, I'm not just going to stop with one image, I'm going to make my images go all the way around. When I'm placing my image, I need to make sure that I leave a good amount of space between one image that I'm cutting fully out and the next. So in this case, I need to leave at least my pinky width in between both images to make sure that that little piece that's going to end up between them doesn't break down and fall apart. When you're ready to start cutting out your image, the best tool to use is going to be a sharp clay knife. You want to make sure it's nice and clean so that every single thing that you cut out is extra clean. You're going to hold it nice and steady and go a little bit at a time until you get the entire image cut out. Now, if I look on the inside of my piece, not all of my cuts made it all the way through. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but you can check yours. And if not all of the cuts go through, go ahead and take that knife tool and go back through it all the way and make sure that it's completely cut all the way through. It might take 2 times to go all the way through, but your second time cutting it out will be much easier. Now that I know all of my seams are cut out, I'm going to use my needle tool to kind of test and see whether or not my entire piece will come out as a whole. Depending on your image and how many small pieces there are cutting out and the amount of detail in your image, you might need to actually cut your image into smaller pieces so that they're more manageable to remove. It's much easier and safer for your overall image if you cut everything into those smaller pieces and remove them piece by piece. After I'm done initially cutting out the image, it's time to start the cleanup process. So I can use a loop or a ribbon tool to get all of the extra gunk out of the inside and the outside. In order to smooth out the cut itself, I can take my needle tool and start running it across all of the areas where I cut. Now your needle tool needs to be nice and clean when you do this, otherwise it's going to put bumps back in. But just running it right along the edges that you cut on the inside will give you a nice clean edge and you won't see as many of your cut lines. Next, I'm going to work on the outside of my image. So I'm going to use my loop or ribbon tool. You can use the big ones or the little ones to kind of clean up all of those edges. You always want to pull away from where you cut and take all that extra clay off. For the final smoothing, I always like to use my fingers because they do the best job getting into all of the nooks and crannies to smooth them out. Even though I did a tiny bit of smoothing on the inside, I'm going to readdress it so you can see here that it is still pretty chunky on the inside, so I can use my fingers or my loop or ribbon tool just to pull all those chunks out. Maybe you're not cutting out a specific shape, but you are cutting out something more simplistic like a circle. You can either use your needle tool and push it in where you would like your circle to go and then start moving it in a circular motion. Another option would be to use the hole punch tools in class. You can get a variety of circles in that way. You can also use any sort of cookie cutout, especially to put your shape in. I do not, however, recommend using cookie cutouts to try to press all the way through since we aren't working on a flat surface. Another option for creating negative space in your project is to actually add relief. Relief is a technique where instead of carving all the way through your project, you'll be carving part way through so that you have an entire layer that is located below your first layer. To start your relief, similar to when you are carving all the way through to create negative space, you're going to trace your image onto your clay and then you're going to use a loop or a ribbon tool to remove the clay. For smaller areas, I prefer the mini ribbon tools with the flat ends. After I've traced out my image, I'm going to just gently start using my loop or ribbon tool to start shaving back the pieces to create some negative space. The big ribbon tool works for large areas, but I do prefer that small ribbon tool, especially to get in all of the edges and to clean up the edges. Once I have it back about halfway or less, I'm going to use my finger to start kind of smoothing out both the inside edge and the outside of my shape. If I'm creating a scene with all of my relief, what I can also do is I can carve some areas a little bit deeper to show that they're further away, or I can carve some areas that are a little bit shallower to show that they are close, just like you can see in the project here.